UK Edu Stories this week. I am very, very excited to welcome back the one, the only Bookie Youssef, who's been away. So I'm just going to welcome her back. Bookie, hi. Oh, you're on mute. You've done it. Hold on.
Take two again. Schoolboy error. Hello, Zena, and hello, everyone. It's good to be back. Who'd have thought on the Teach Me Edu Stories that I will then be off air for about 8 weeks because of COVID-19. But anyway, it's good to be back today.
It's really, really good to have you back. I have to say, Mark and I were really, really worried about you, especially after hearing how badly you were sounding.
Yeah.
And in fact, Mark and I did say, she needs to go to hospital. She doesn't sound good. We're a bit worried about her. So just so thankful that you're back. So, yeah. But welcome back, everybody, as well. This week's edition of UK Edu Stories is Surviving and Thriving as an Early Career Teacher During a Pandemic. And we have got three wonderful guests. I'm going to bring them into the studio. We have our wonderful Jenny Webb, Hannah Lawrence, and Kasia Schofield. Hi, ladies.
Hi.
Hello, everyone.
Thank you so much for coming. I'm going to go round the room, and if you could just introduce yourselves and tell us a bit about what you do, and then we'll go straight into the questions. Obviously, if anyone's watching us live and you have any questions for us, please just enter them into the chat, and we will get as many of them as we can answered. Thank you. Jenny.
Hi, I'm Jenny Webb. I am an English teacher and an assistant head for teaching and learning at a big school in Leeds. Written a couple of books and do CPD quite a lot. So, very happy to be here.
Fabulous. Really, really pleased to see you. Shall we go to Hannah?
Yep.
Hello, I'm Hannah. So I'm an English teacher and a mentor in a school in Leeds. I've previously been second in department and completed the Teach First programme.
Oh, fabulous. And we've worked in the same school before, and I think that was your first school, wasn't it? So you were an early career teacher.
School.
Yeah, only years ago. Thank you so much, Hannah. And Kasia.
Hello, everybody. I'm Kasia Schofield. I am a freshly appointed assistant principal for teaching and learning. In the past, I've worked with both Jenny, Hannah, and Zena in the previous school, and I was an NQT and MTT coordinator in one of the inner city schools in Leeds.
Fabulous. Okay, so thank you so much. I'm going to kick off with the first question, and I'm going to pose that to Kasia. What are the biggest challenges for trainees during the pandemic? What can schools do to help them, and what can they do to help themselves?
Can I just say to start with that you are an absolute hero to have gone through your teacher training in the first lockdown and now having to do what every single other teacher in school will be doing, being an NQT and having still to worry about your NQT induction year and worrying about whether it will be extended, whether it will not be extended, how to gather the evidence, how to get the support in the times when everybody is so isolated and the support might not necessarily be there at hand at all times. When thinking about the challenges, the biggest challenges that all the trainees are facing at the moment is, first of all, dealing with the unknown, dealing with the unpredictable situation that we are all in, having to manage the situation at home, in your personal life and at work, having to be the only person asking for help because all your mentors and all the staff in school will be busy doing other things, and sometimes they will put the mentoring and the support to the back burner, assuming that you are fine. And also having to worry about your progress, about your CPD, about your professional development, about completing the course and making sure that you are meeting the teacher standards as you would in a normal situation. And thinking about the challenges, there is all sorts of different areas to explore there, because first of all, at the moment, being isolated and being on your own, NQTs don't have the opportunity to network with others. They don't have the opportunity to go to wonderful conferences when you exchange ideas, when you can feel the buzz of any CPD session or any network event. There is no opportunity to talk to others. There is no opportunity to exchange ideas, but also share all the anxieties and all the issues and all the problems that you might have. There is also that huge uncertainty around what it will be like when we go back into the classroom, because when you think about NQTs, this year's NQTs, they've probably only had the experience of 3 months of being in class that depends on how the bubbles burst and how many lessons actually happened in real life, and how many lessons were happening through the in the online way. And also taking into account that during the teacher training year last year, the biggest, the longest term 3, where there would be some form of experience in classroom, didn't happen. So there will be also the anxiety of how do I cope in the classroom environment? How do I manage the behaviour? Because a lot of CPD is not happening at the moment. The support is not there because you can't physically, practically apply any approaches. So there could be a lot of reading that is happening, but there is no way to actually validate it in real life. It has been flagged up by many less experienced colleagues that mentor meetings are not necessarily happening, and mentors and ITT and QT coordinators are not necessarily prioritising it, because there is also other issues that all schools are facing. And I think that is one of the challenges, because early careers teachers are not receiving the amount of support that they are entitled to and they should be receiving. There is the uncertainty, even though DfE have issued the update in August 2020 to say that the induction year carries on as normal, so NQTs can and should collect their evidence exactly the same way. The only implications in terms of COVID-19 is that even, especially when the NQTs have got prolonged absences due to COVID, that is not going to count towards extending the NQT year, which means that they can still finish in August. The problem there is that how can you gather the evidence, how to be smart with gathering the evidence, how to make sure that you are making that progress, that you are heading in the right direction. And when you are isolated at home, when you can't speak to anybody in person, if you do not have that support network, and if your mentors and more experienced staff in school are not checking in, that could have all sorts of implications, not only on your professional life, but also on your well-being and your private life. So I think the problem is very complex, and what we have to be doing is making sure that early careers teachers are reaching out, and don't be afraid to scream and shout that you need support. Scream and shout whether you need some form of consistency. And one of my current NQTs sent me a lovely email last week thanking for the weekly checking in. So even though there is some form of really rigid structure in terms of CPD that I've offered, they see it more like an opportunity to network with people, have a chat, something to look forward to, and also having the forum to share how they feel and what they need, and having that little bit of sense of normality in this crazy world as it is at the moment. So I would say the mentors and more experienced staff need to remember what it's like, or what it was like to be an NQT, and reach out and make a phone call, send a silly text, send a silly email, just to make them feel part of that school community that they probably don't feel like at the moment. And for all the early careers teachers, don't be afraid to ask for help, shout for help, network with people, ask for some form of stability. If it's a mentor meeting once every week, if it's a meeting with the department once a week, because these are the things that we can control, and these are the things that will make us feel better. And I think it's really strange that the NQTs are actually in a much more difficult position than all of us are, because we've been teaching for years. We've had our ups and downs, but every single one of us had a more or less, but at least more normal induction year. And what they have to do now is they have to do what we do plus more, because we don't need to worry about our induction. We don't need to worry about whether we will tick the boxes for NQT standards. They are important, and they are actually a good friend if you understand them, because they show and they teach you how to be reflective. But not having the guidance of your mentor, or the guidance of the colleagues, or the guidance of the peers, it could be incredibly isolating and very tough. And you can get yourself into that situation where you don't think you are doing well, because you don't have the forum to exchange ideas, and you don't have the forum to just check in with others. So I think just being human, remembering that we are human, and remembering that actually we are sociable creatures, and we do need to network and social, and finding those avenues to do it is one of the best things that we can do, and best things that we can advise.
Thank you, Kasia. And I agree. I mean, I was only talking to a friend of mine the other day about how tough it must be on early careers teachers to come into education at such a time. All teachers are finding it difficult, but I couldn't imagine trying to train and pass my NQT year in a pandemic. That would be pretty stressful. Thank you so much for that response. Bookie, I'm handing over to you.
Okay, thank you. So the next question is being posed to, let me just put myself here. Whoops. I'll just ask the question. Sorry, Hannah. I'm posing the next question to you. And it's, what do early career teachers need to know about the process of applying for jobs?
I think the first thing that you should start off by doing is researching the school. Find out as much as you can about the school. Look at the website, look at the Ofsted report, but also talk to other people who work at that school. So reaching out to people on Twitter and just having a chat about what the school is actually like to work at. Because there's no point you applying to a school just because it's got good or outstanding on that Ofsted report. It's about whether or not that school fits in with your ethos, how you see yourself as a teacher, what you think is really important. If it's a school where they're constantly putting pressure on staff and it's all about results, that might not be necessarily the right place for you and the right place for you to develop. I also think it's really important to research the school so that when you're forming your application is like personalized for the school you're applying for. It's not enough to just create an English teacher role and think that's going to be enough for every school you apply for. You need to tailor make your application so it fits the school. So, for example, if the school's really interested in running challenging extra lectures for their top set students, then think about how you can feed into that. How can you contribute to that with your subject knowledge? The other thing I would recommend is get a friend to check your letter. I mean, I'm a dyslexic, so I miss out a lot of words in my sentences. So I always ask a friend to check my letter and read it through. I think having spag errors in your letter is kind of the first step that will kind of not get you through the door of that interview process. I'd also say that when you're on interview, be aware that like from the moment you walk in, you are on interview. So it doesn't matter if it's the head teacher's PA showing you around, you need to make a good impression. And you do that through asking lots of questions about the school and being really interested and thinking about how you can kind of fit into the school and really contribute to that ethos.
Thanks, Hannah. I think there's some great responses in the chat at the moment. I just want to say that in response to early careers teachers, Amy Jeatley says, early careers teachers will have heightened anxiety at this time. And I think obviously looking for jobs and those who are like, trying to find a school that they want to work in is going to be really, really difficult at this time. So that's some really, really good advice that you've offered everybody. I'm just going to ask the next question to Jenny. What are the best tips for success in job interviews?
Okay. So I'll start by just reiterating a couple of things that Hannah said because they link really, really closely, and I think it's really important. Understanding the school and the role that you're applying for is absolutely critical. So you have to do your homework. All schools are unique organisms and they operate in different ways. The other really, really important thing about that is that you have to see the relationship as being like this symbiotic relationship where you bring something to the school and they bring something to you. And so you're interviewing them as much as they're interviewing you. And it has to be a right fit from both sides. And if it's not the right fit, it's not good for anybody. So just accepting a job or applying for a job because you are really anxious about not getting a job is not really the right way to go. And you need to think really, really carefully when you go to an interview that you're interviewing them. This is an opportunity for you to get your head around what the school is like now. Ideally, you get to do the interview in person, and some schools are doing that at the moment in a distanced way. I had an interview this year and was there in person, but it's really I was able to see what the people are like and see what the feel is like and see what the displays are like and think about whether or not the school is living their values. That's really, really important. If you're doing it virtually, you will still get a feel for people. You'll still get some kind of, the kinds of questions they're asking you and the things that they focus on and the way that they talk to you about a lesson or activity you've had to do. All of those things will tell you whether or not this is the right school for you, whether it's developmental and supportive. In terms of actual interviews, I would strongly advise that when you interview for a job, when you're answering a question in your interview, so normally you'll have like a panel of people and they will take it in turns to ask you questions, and they'll have asked exactly the same questions to every candidate, because that's how employment law works. So everyone has to be asked the same thing. Everyone has to be given the same opportunities. So if they gave one candidate a prompt to answer a question better, they have to give you the prompt to answer the question better. All of that has to be fair. But what's really important is that when you get asked a question, you take a little bit of time. Don't feel like you've just got to race straight in and gabble, because I'd much rather have somebody take 20 seconds, 30 seconds to compose themselves and then give a response. My best advice is that you answer like this. You start by giving 1 or 2 sentences to just answer the question. So if the question is, what does an excellent, challenging chemistry lesson look like? You say, a challenging chemistry lesson looks like this. Okay, so you just answer the question in 1 sentence. The next thing you do is you elaborate. For example, blah, 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 blah. It might include these things and these things and these things. Okay, then link it to your own experience and the impact you might have had. So if you're applying for an NQT job, you're going to be saying, for example, I've had training on this, or I've done this in my PGCE year, or I have experienced this, or I've observed this. If you're applying as an early career teacher and you say an RQT, you've already had a couple of full years in the classroom under your belt, you might say, in my own classroom, I've done this and this has been the impact. I changed my practice and started doing this and this was better. So does that make sense? So it's about saying, just answer the question, no waffle. Yeah, answer the question 1 sentence, give some examples, like kind of develop your response, and then in my own practice or from my own experience, this, and then kind of bring it back like a sandwich. Yeah, so really, really important that you're nice and clear. You do not have to answer straight away. And also, everyone says silly things in interviews, so the actual interview responses, don't panic. I mean, I've said some horrendous things in interviews before and then gone, oh, what did I just say, and still got the job. So generally they want to see that you're a human being. They do not need to see a perfect robot who can just bash out the best responses. They want to see a human that they can actually work with, and that's the thing that's really important. An interview is less about you giving the right answer and more about you coming across as the kind of person who's going to work in that organization. And if you're applying for an NQT job particularly, they want to see, is this a teacher? Is this somebody who has the potential in 8, 9, 10 years to be a cracking teacher in my school? Or is this the kind of person who isn't going to be reflective and isn't going to be open to learn? Because essentially they're appointing somebody based on their potential, not based on all the things they already know. Okay, so if you're applying for an NQT job, go in like, yes, I'm a novice, I've got loads to learn, I really want to learn from you, and I think this school is where I'm going to learn the best and thrive. And that's kind of the best way to look at it, I think.
Oh,
Thank you, Jenny. So before I even jump in to ask Hannah the next question, there have been a lot of responses here. So Amy Jeatley, thank you for joining us, and thank you for also contributing your thoughts as well. Some advice that Amy shares in relation to, applications of jobs and things like that. She gives advice about looking at Mumsnet to find out what's actually being said. She also posed this interesting point about trying to understand or ask your friends what your unique selling point is so that you can actually weave it into some of your responses. Now, we've got one question that was posed earlier by Tej, and I'll pose that to everyone. He said, with regards to applications, they sometimes give bad references and it may actually hinder job offers. This is what he's actually seen. Any particular advice? So Hannah, Kasia, or Jenny, anyone who'd like to answer that?
I'll just take that first. Mm-hmm. In terms of, so there's a couple of things there. In terms of references, a school is required to give you a decent reference if you've done a decent job. So in the case where somebody feels as though they may have been given a reference which is essentially libelous or is kind of not a true reflection of their work, that's something that you have a right to challenge. So I would strongly advise that if you honestly think that has happened, you go and speak to your union immediately, because you're protected from employers who might be malevolent in their intent. Now, the vast majority of schools would never even consider doing that. So please don't worry yourself if you're a trainee who's had a difficult training year. For example, I had a really, really difficult year when I did my PGCE year, my first. Yeah, you're allowed to ask to see your reference, Amy says. But anyway, when I was doing my PGCE year, I had a horrendous first placement, and that reference got me like, I was really, really concerned about my mentor writing my reference. So yeah, you have a right to get a decent reference if you've done a decent job, but also there is nothing wrong with having a conversation with the school that you're applying to at some point, and in confidence, and saying, I am concerned about the type of reference I'm going to get. I'm going to give you these people's names as references, but I'm also going to give you a couple of backups for people I actually think would probably give me a more honest reference. You have the ability to have that conversation in confidence, in a professional way. I would not advise going to your school that you're applying to and saying, this school has done this to me and this to me and this to me, and I don't think they're going to give me a good reference. Don't do it like that. Be professional. But it's worth just saying delicately and discreetly, I'm a bit concerned about my reference.
Thanks, Jenny.
Thank you. Thank you. So, Hannah, over to you. And I think this is a question that I've heard many people, many teachers actually pose. How can teachers form positive relationships with students, particularly from a remote learning perspective?
I think it's really hard from a remote learning perspective, because obviously you're not seeing the students in front of you. It's really difficult. I would speak to your mentor. For example, my trainee, we post like a little picture of her and a bit of information about her onto our group page for the kids to see. So that immediately kind of makes her like a little bit more human, and they can interact a little bit more. If you're doing live lessons, maybe at the start of the lesson, have a conversation with the kids, speak to them. How are they getting on? How are they finding things at home? Take an interest in them. Another thing you could do is ask them to write you a letter. That's something I tend to do at the beginning of every year. So my students write me a letter, and there's some like metacognitive questions in there as well, like, what have you found difficult in English? What have you enjoyed? What's helped you in the past? And that way you can read the letter, and if you can respond to their letter and tell them, oh, that's really interesting. Let me tell you a bit about me and how that links to that. And you're building the relationship even though you're not seeing them. I would also say, ask your mentor or ask other people about those students. So before you go and teach them, you know a little bit about them. So you know things that might trigger them, something that might have happened in their past, so you can be really delicate and sensitive with some subjects. The other thing I would definitely say is, in terms of building relationships, it's about taking an interest in them, but it's more than that. It's also about having mutual respect. You know, you respecting them, but also them respecting you. So it's really important that you don't go in and try and have all these fun activities. I would steer clear of that. I would more go for consistency, have really high expectations of those students, and be consistent. And I think if students can be successful in your lessons, you've won the battle, because kids want to be successful. If they enjoy your lessons and they feel successful in those lessons, then you've built that relationship with that student. You want them to feel like when they walk through your door, even if that's remotely, they can achieve something, they can have their goals, and they can achieve those goals with your support.
Yeah, and you know, that's a key thing for me, Bookie. I'm always saying, you know, relationships.
Exactly. Yes.
So important.
Yeah. And I love your letter idea. I've done something similar, not a letter as such. It's just to find out with students and new classes I actually teach about what they find difficult in science, what they actually enjoy, and, you know, and any particular thing they think is relevant. And that is such a powerful way to get to know your students and actually plan around that. So thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and insights in that regard, Hannah. Yeah. Thank you.
I will say, Amy has also said, your energy and enthusiasm and having humour helps to settle them and build relationships. And absolutely, and I'd actually say, being authentic, being you, and showing your own vulnerability. This is such a difficult situation for everybody. So showing that you're human as well really also helps them to understand that they're not the only ones going through this. Thank you so much, Hannah. Okay, so my next question is to you, Jenny, or in fact anyone on the panel. What are the key elements of teaching and learning new teachers should focus on?
This is really important. This is literally your bread and butter. So the key message I have is simplicity. A lot of trainees think that they have to be like all the people they see on Twitter, or like all the people they see on test resources. You do not need to be any of those people. You just need to be yourself. Really, really important that you focus on the reality of what learning actually is and what teaching actually is. And essentially, it comes down to the moment you close that door, when we're back in the real world. We actually have a classroom door to close. But the minute you close that door and it's just you and them, it is magic. Like that, I cannot wait for that time to come back. Honestly, it makes me feel a little bit emotional even thinking about it. And that moment when it's you and the students, and you are essentially, you're their expert, you're their guide, all of that relationship is incredibly powerful. Now, when you're thinking about your lessons, you're thinking about planning lessons, you're thinking about you as a teacher and the physical things that you're doing, it's about setting the bar really high, having high expectations of kids. And I mean that in the sense that we need to do what's appropriate for the needs of our students. And I would not advocate saying, I'm going to give you this ridiculously hard piece of work to do, even though I know you've got severe SEN, because I've got high standards. That's obviously not what I mean. This is about being sensible and doing what's appropriate for students. But we have to have high expectations of them. We cannot go into a classroom and think, well, these kids are poor, or these kids are pupil premium, or these kids are this particular group, and I know that statistically they don't perform very well, so I'm going to expect less, or I'm going to make their lives easier. You're not there to be their friend and mollycoddle them. You're there to be their teacher and get the best out of them. And you do that by going into that room and saying, I believe in you. I don't care what you're doing elsewhere. In my classroom, you have there are no limits to what you can achieve in my classroom. And that has to be your consistent mantra. You know, it works. It works. If they believe that you think they can do anything, they will pretty much do anything. I often say to my students, here's a task, dazzle me, off you go. And if you give them that challenge and you say, please do something that I haven't seen before, do something amazing, they'll often do it. And it's incredible. I think you need to never ever underestimate the power that young people have to surprise you and surprise themselves. So teaching and learning, set the bar high. A couple of really, really key things that I would want to nail in my first couple of years. Teacher talk, and getting teacher talk kind of working right for you. So that's the power of telling stories and learning through stories. That's how our brains work. They work really, really well like that. Making sure that your explanations are really, really crystal clear. I often script myself because I'm a waffler. Okay, so I often script my explanations. I often make sure like my teacher talk is kept really nice and trim so that I can make the most of learning time, because really I want really powerful teacher talk, and then I want students doing the hard work up here. Okay. And then modeling is the absolute kind of that if you can model really, really well, that's pretty much most of your work done. So I would make sure you are looking at what really excellent work looks like in your subject. You know, my husband's a trumpet teacher, and I hear him modeling in his live lessons, and he's modeling for students. What does it look like? How is he getting there? What exactly are the things that he's doing technique wise to make that work? And I do the same thing as an English teacher. I've got my visualizer, and I'm writing, and I'm thinking out loud, and I'm showing them exactly what it looks like and how to build it up. So modeling, teacher talk, keep your standards high, and make sure they know that you believe that they can do it, because honestly they will just surprise you and surprise you and surprise you.
Oh, that's brilliant. And I have to say, Jenny, when I was at school, my teachers didn't have high expectations of me. My predicted grades were 4 grades lower than what I actually achieved in the end. I was predicted an E for English and an E for English literature, and I got a B. And so and I look back now and I think to myself, hold on a minute, you know, had my teachers actually believed in me, I probably could have got an A. So those high expectations, and it's not, like you said, it's not about setting them work that they can't do, but it's about having those high expectations and allowing them to dazzle you. Amy again has said something brilliant. You know, just the way we scaffold learning, we should scaffold our high expectations to help them meet them. And that's exactly what you said. Modelling is so important. So thank you.
Yeah, sorry, I'm just taking it in. Fantastic. Crystal advice, really great. And I love the fact you said within the first couple of years, because if you've got that sorted, you're good to go. Anyway, sorry, so, Kasia, how do you know when you're ready for the next step? And it could be in terms of promotion, you know, looking for responsibilities in that regard.
Can I just say, one of the most important things is be confident that this is really what you want, and don't rush, because within the school environment, you need to be very, very confident that you have hacked it in the classroom, that you know your students, that you know your school, that you know yourself as a teacher. I think that is probably one of the most important thing, that you know yourself and you know how far you've gone. And once you are ready to step up a little bit, so get a little bit outside of your classroom and outside of your teaching practice within your classroom with your students, and you are ready to be a mentor, or you are ready to contribute to the wider life of the school, or you are keen and ready to work with staff, and you get the buzz of working with others and contributing, and you are confident in yourself, you can take the next step. What I would say as well is that it doesn't necessarily mean that it needs to be a formalized, any form of responsibility, whether it would be any formalized promotion or whether it would be any formalized step up or changing a school. It could be anything that will give you that extra bit of experience. I think one of the indicators as well is if you meet one leader, somebody who could work alongside of you, who could be your line manager, who could be a leader within the school that you work at, and it's the person that you know that you are learning from, is the person that you would like to be ultimately one day, that's normally the indication that you are ready to do something extra. But my biggest piece of advice would be, don't rush, because I have seen over the years how quickly people were promoted and how quickly they burnt out, because they didn't realize that what was waiting for them around the corner wasn't necessarily what they were waiting for and what they wanted, but they didn't have enough confidence to step back and say, well, I actually don't want to do it anymore, and I want to go back to being a classroom teacher and redefine what I'm really interested in.
Thank you so much for that, Kasia. And just to add to that point as well, Amy immediately has shared that, build allies at school, people you can trust. And when you feel you're ready, use them, as a sounding board. So that mirrors a lot of what you've actually said. Thank you so much. Over to you, Zena, for the next question.
Thank you. Thanks, Bookie. So my next question is to Jenny. What can you do to develop yourself and get experience of leadership roles?
I think it's really important that we define for ourselves what leadership really is. And leadership is not about having a job title, really. The title isn't what's important. Leadership is about being somebody who feels that someone who is acting in a way that shows that they know that they are responsible and that they have influence over others. And that's really, really critical, because that means that you can be a leader in your classroom, you can be a leader within your department, you can be a leader in a particular situation, a conversation, in a moment where you're supporting a student to cope with their feelings or an experience that they've had. Leadership is not just, how do I get up the next rung of the ladder? So that's really important. Obviously, the next rung of the ladder is important to an extent. I mean, we all have to be honest with ourselves, and we know what our career ambitions are. And there is absolutely nothing wrong with being an ambitious person. There's nothing wrong with saying, do you know what? I could do their job. So that's my next thing. I think if that's how you're feeling, embrace it. And it's important that you think really carefully about what that person does, what their skill set is, what you have, and what your deficit is at the moment. So there'll be lots and lots of things that you can do to prepare for any kind of role. But what I would generally say is, you need to be thinking about shadowing people who are already doing the job. So, for example, if you're interested in being a Senko, or you want to figure out what that would entail, spend some time in the SEN department. That's a tip that we got from Nikki Cunningham-Smith at our conference on the weekend. So she used to just sit in the SEN department to have her lunch and at break time to kind of soak it all in. And then when opportunities did come up, she was just there and she knew the systems. When I was, before I became a head of department, I was always kind of volunteering to do stuff. I was writing schemes of work, I was doing this, I was doing that, I was mentoring. Really, really important that you get the opportunities that you can. A lot of schools will be really, really good about leadership experience. And they won't look at you funny if you're quite early on in your career and ask you, and you're asking for experience. If someone looks at you and says, you're too young for that, wait, you're possibly in the wrong school, or at least that person isn't particularly supportive. But yeah, asking, can I sit in on your line management meeting once and kind of see what that's like? Can I sit in while you do this piece of timetabling so that I can understand what you do? I've once had a head teacher who was brilliant in the past, who let me sit in and listen to things like kind of the decisions being made around appointing staff, decisions being made about finance and resource management and talent development and all of that kind of strategic planning area. And that was really, really valuable, but I asked for it and I got it. So ask for what you want. I think the other really important thing is that what schools should be doing, if leaders are listening, is they should be explicitly having conversations with people and saying, what do you want? What's your 2-year plan, your 5-year plan, your 10-year plan? What is it that you where do you see yourself? And let's map out a plan to help you get there. Because if you don't do that, you lose good teachers. And that's really important. You know, Kasia and I used to work together, and we worked quite hard to make sure we had conversations with our trainees and our teach firsts and make sure they felt as though there were development opportunities. And in the past, I've had conversations with some of those really strong trainees and people who we've nurtured and said, you know what, it's time. It's time. I mean, that's what happened to Hannah Lawrence, because she's absolutely phenomenal. But it was time, you know? And I think that that's important too. You know, you need to have early career teachers who know what they want and can approach people and ask for experience in various areas and try lots of different things out. Like, you don't know if you want to go pastoral, academic, or a mix of everything, and you can kind of do whatever you like. But also leaders need to be reaching out and explicitly saying to people, what is it you're looking for? What's the next step for you? What can I do to support you? Because sometimes people surprise you. You know, I had a conversation like this really, really recently at my school with somebody, and what they said to me really shocked me. And I was like, oh, I never would have thought you were looking for something like that. Right, let's sort it out. You know, so yeah, talent. Amy's just said talent spotting, and it really is important, because if you're not talent spotting, you're not growing the next generation of leaders. Because what happens as you go up a school is that the jobs get smaller, and the number of jobs get smaller and smaller. There's only one head. There are only 2 vice principals or deputies. There are only 3 or 4 assistant heads. So when you've got 15 subject leaders, there are very few positions for them to step up into, and then there are fewer and fewer, and that's how it happens, you know. So you need to be looking at where your talented staff are, and you want to retain them, because otherwise they're going to look up and see nothing there for them, and then they're going to move, and before you know it, they've gone. So it's really in the best interest of schools to think really carefully about succession planning. Absolutely critical. Otherwise, you're just doing the same work over and over and over again, getting new people in and trying to get them all sorted, and it's just a massive waste of resources. Why train good people and then lose them? Is my feeling. Sorry, that I've completely not answered the question there. Just gone off on a big rant.
I think it's much needed as well, though, because succession planning and development, career development, are key. You know, it also makes staff feel as though they're actually being looked after and cared for in that regard. So yeah, totally agree.
Oh, can I just add to this? Something that I think is really, really important and often gets overlooked is that career development and experience is often hindered for a significant proportion of the workforce by things like parental leave. And I think it's really, really important that we acknowledge here that there are lots of young women in our profession who are maybe in their early 20s, just starting out, thinking, okay, so if I want this and this and this, I'm probably going to have to think about the fact that I'm going to have some kind of break in that time. How is that going to affect my career? And I know how anxious that made me when I was in my 20s, because I'm an ambitious person. I know how capable I am, but I'm thinking, right, okay, can I have kids? I don't know. What's the best? And it's really, really important that young women hear the message, and their partners and people who are going to adopt and people who are going to go through IVF and all of those different kind of the wonderful spectrum of what it is to become a parent. It's really important that all those people hear, you have got rights. You've got the right to be a teacher, to expect your school to look after you, to expect really strong professional development opportunities, and to still also be a parent and do all those things as well. Those 2 things do not have to, you don't have to pick either or. You don't have to go career or kids. You can pick career or kids if you want. That's totally fine as well. But it is absolutely within your grasp to have a family and continue to develop in between all those bits. It's okay to develop while you're on maternity leave. It's okay to develop while you're pregnant. It's okay to apply for jobs while you're on maternity leave. It's okay to expect your school to look after you and give you those opportunities in amongst all of that the kind of career, let's not say a break, it's a little pause in your kind of in your progression. Those things don't have to be as complicated as you think they are, and some schools make them more complicated than they need to be, and they probably need more feisty young people saying, this doesn't need to be complicated, give me this and this and this, because then people will change. Just putting it out there. The maternity CPD project is an amazing organisation. I'll just put in a plug there. You can find them on Twitter. They've got a great website. We are now a registered charity, which is awesome. Well done, Emma. But basically, we can work with women on maternity leave. We can work with fathers on parental leave. We can work with people who are trying to get pregnant, people who have had postnatal depression, the whole range. But we can also work with schools to make sure they're doing right by their staff.
And I think that's coupled with, there are obviously women who, we're going into women's stuff now. We've gone totally off piece.
Yes.
Jenny Webb.
I can't help myself.
There's Bretta, and I can't remember her surname. She's going to kill me now. Who's been going into schools and talking about, actually, we need to be more aware of periods and the menopause and the impact that this has on women in teaching. So there's lots that we can go. We are totally going off piece, and so yeah. But anyway, let's crack on.
Valid point you made.
It is, yeah.
I think it's really. Yeah, it's really key to, for people to realize that you don't have to have one or the other. You can have a family and a career, so it can work. All right. So Hannah, next question to you. How can early career teachers look after their health and also deal with stress? It's a biggie, I think that's a universal question that any educator will be interested in hearing the answer to.
I feel like I've learned the hard way how to deal with this. I think making a list of non-negotiables. So deciding what your working day is going to look like and when you're going to stop work. So for example, if you're going to decide, after 4 o'clock, you're going to stop work and that's it. It's about kind of having strength to not carry on working in the evening. Teaching is this profession that can kind of swallow you up, and you can spend all hours of the day doing it, worrying about the kids, planning next lesson, doing data analysis. It can take up your whole entire life. And you still probably won't have even finished half the jobs. So it's really important that you decide after a certain time you're going to stop work, and deciding, you know what, my weekend is my time for me, so I'm not going to work on my weekend, and not feeling guilt. You're still a phenomenal teacher for taking that time out, and it will make you a better teacher. Because it means on Monday you're going to be so much more refreshed. You're going to be able to deal with situations in a rational way. And you feel less frustrated if things go wrong, because you've got something still back for yourself. The other thing, the advice I would personally give is I wouldn't have things like emails on your phone, because I think if you've got emails on your phone, it's so tempting to kind of check your emails at like 9, 10 o'clock at night and respond. Don't have emails on your phone. That's your space. That's your area. People shouldn't be intruding on that area. The other thing is, I'd say, if you're finding things tough, write a list of what you're finding tough and really speak to someone about it. I think when I was initially training, I was really scared about being honest and saying I was finding something difficult, because you don't want to put more stress on other people and you kind of want to look like you're just getting on with stuff. But actually having the strength to have those conversations and say, look, I'm finding this a bit tough, can I get some extra help, is actually a sign of real strength, and people will really respond very well to that. So for example, if you're struggling with planning, reach out to people in your department. You never know, they might have a lesson that you can use, or you can just tweak, or a resource that's going to save the day. If you're really struggling to switch off in the evening, speak to your mentor about that. If you're worrying about your progress, speak to people in your department, speak to people on Twitter. I know if you're training now, you're not in school, but you've got a huge network of people on Twitter who are just here to help you, really. So reach out to people, ask people for that extra support, because more often than not, people will give it to you.
Thank you so much, Hannah. And I think it's really great to stress, because I know in some circumstances, some people don't feel, for a variety of reasons, that they can actually speak to people within their school. But the reminder about the fact that there's an external community that can actually support you. This is something I've actually tapped into myself, actually, at various stages of my own professional career. So it's really good to hear that point reiterated. Over to you, Zena.
Thank you. And also, things don't have to be perfect. We constantly try and strive for this perfect lesson. I know, Bucky, me and you both, we suffer with this badly, but don't follow our lead at all. Things don't have to be perfect. And if you have really high expectations of yourself, you'll end up getting stressed out with them. So, and I totally agree with the things that Hannah was talking about. Yeah, exactly. Amy said again, high expectations, high standards, and they need to be realistic. So sometimes 50% is okay, you know, to just make sure and recognize the signs when you're starting to feel a bit anxious about things. And then it might just be, okay, this is just for a day. And if it moves into 2 days and 3 days, I'd definitely suggest you speak to somebody. Look, there is nobody on the in the planet that doesn't suffer with a bit of anxiety or get a bit stressed out. And imposter syndrome is huge for a lot of people. So you won't be the only one. So by reaching out, you might be helping somebody else as well. So you never know. Kasia, moving over to you. Obviously, you know, you've done quite a bit of work with EAL learners, but what are the best strategies and resources to supporting EAL learners?
Well, there is only one resource that you really need, and that's you yourself as a teacher. And I've been reflecting on it quite a lot recently because I'm an EAL trained teacher. So I taught to, I was trained to teach ESOL, and I taught ESOL for a few years before I moved over, and then decided that actually I want to get attached to English and literature, and then I retrained in a way. And there is an abundance of resources online. There is lots and lots of support networks and lots of websites where you can get some really fancy, wonderful, colourful, beautiful worksheets. But you will never use them successfully if you don't have the full understanding of what it's like to be an EAL learner, what it's like to be bilingual, multilingual, what it's like to cope with your brain who can go crazy. And I tell you, when I go home to speak to my parents, even though I live in the English world, I completely mix languages up and I start translanguaging and I forget words and I don't know how to express myself and I feel like a complete numpty. And that's what our students feel like in the classroom. I am raising two bilingual children and they are completely different and they've got completely different linguistic attributes. So one will be stronger in one language and the other will be stronger in the other language, and they will have issues with all sorts of different things. And it's exactly the same in your classroom. So you are the resource that you need. And I'm not saying that you can do it within 1 month. I'm not saying that you will do it for one lesson or for one class. It's a long process that takes years and years to fully understand it. But I really believe that you need to start with understanding the science and understanding the biology of your brain and understanding how you cope with it, because just a little bit of information about the fact that if you are learning the second language or any other language before you are 6, it will be a completely different learning process, and it will be completely different when you are 10, 15, and it will be different when you are 20, because that's when your internal grammar gets blocked around the age of 18, and that's when you actually have to start really consciously learning grammar. Otherwise you will never get it and you will never be proficient. So that's the one thing, that fully understanding the language acquisition and how different it is at different stages, understanding what is the difference between the first language acquisition and second, and how you can shift across. What are little things like different methods that have been developed over the years, because it was completely crazy in the 18th, 19th century, where it was just the grammar translation. So you would be sitting there with your Latin book and translating word for word, grammar structure for grammar structure. And they moved completely the other way in 70s when they decided that actually we are going to invent this wonderful Suggestopedia. So we will make the students imagine that they live in a completely different reality. Because if you disconnect your learners from their own reality, they will be a little bit more confident, because they will not be conscious about how they sound in another language, how they are going to use the mouth and, you know, all the muscles producing completely different sounds that they didn't grow up to use. So you have to, as a teacher, have the full understanding of how to prepare yourself, and then you can literally plan a lesson within 5 minutes, because you know exactly what triggers what and how to teach and how to address, how to scaffold, how to support. And also little things like, you don't start with asking a student to write a sentence before you give them the opportunity to do a lot of listening and a lot of reading, because a simple little tweak like your passive language skills like reading and listening come first. So it's okay for an EAL child to have a silent period when they don't speak to you. If Ofsted walk through the door and say, well, you've not engaged that child, well, actually I have, because I'm not stressing them and I'm not disengaging them and I'm not completely overwhelming them, because they are sitting there and they are listening and they are taking it in as your 5-month-old child would, because they don't speak to you, but they constantly take it in. So you are mixing constantly between language acquisition first and second, But as a teacher, you are fully aware what not to do to damage the relationship, to damage the learning that can happen. And the second thing I would say, the strategies is making sure that you are keeping it real for your students, that you are putting them at the center of everything that you are doing. And we've heard it all, or that student is very EAL, that makes my blood boil, because EAL is not a disability. There is many schools, and I understand why part of inclusion is to add EAL students to the inclusion unit, but it's very tricky for staff to then, or teachers or anybody, to understand that EAL is not a disability. It's just functioning in another language, or functioning in 3-5 languages, some of them speak more, and making sure that you are not making an assumption that they don't have the ability, that they are not able. They are. They just don't have the tools to show you how able they are. And obviously it's trickier when you get students like Jenny and I and Hannah and Zina have been around students who are not literate in their first language. And then obviously there are different other barriers, but it doesn't mean that the brain is not going to switch. It doesn't mean that you can't make them function in a language, that you can't make them learn and make progress. And fully understanding at what stages your students are at, because I think the Cambridge University, I like their way of trying to establish language proficiency in learners, because there is literally a few little steps. So you will have the beginners, you will have the elementary, you will have the pre-intermediate and intermediate, which is the students who can access a more academic side of things. You can't ask a child who is a beginner to start analysing a poem or inferring, because it's not natural. That's not how we learn. That's not how we function as humans. That's not how our brain is going to help us access the work. So having the full understanding of what your students can and what they can't do, what you have to do then is you have to be really careful not to jump into, right, this lesson I'm going to do this, and that lesson I'm going to do that, and that will do because they can access the work. You need to make sure that you plan, and it's a long process. So you have to have a strategy from the beginning of September till whenever they leave your school, and you have to follow it through, because your strategy needs to encompass not just the content of your subject. And I really feel for teachers who are monolingual and they've never learned another language and they don't have that understanding because it's harder, because we have to teach the content of the main curriculum, but we also have to teach English as a second language or another language or a foreign language, call it whatever. And what you have to do is you have to almost work on two completely different levels. And that EAL level is always very subtle. And you are the only person who is orchestrating that whole progress and the whole process, because you have to make sure that you are giving them the tools of grammar. And grammar is important. I know that there was a lot of grammar discussion on Twitter recently, but with teaching English as a foreign, any other language, additional language, let's call it, you need to make sure that students understand, because if they don't understand, the gaps will widen and they will not know what they are all about. So you can't expect students to understand when they are reading a text in the past tense if you've not taught them what's the difference between present and past. Little things like when I love linguistics, and I didn't choose linguistics for my master's only because it was very male dominated and I didn't want to be the only female doing it. But the one thing that really mesmerized me when I was studying was that there are some languages that have completely different concept of time than us. So there are some languages in the world that will not have the expression of future. So they express their future in present. So if you then try to, I don't know, ask your students, what will you be doing tomorrow? They will switch off. They don't have a clue what you mean because they don't know what it means in the future. The same way for us, Eastern Europeans, we don't have perfect tenses. So it took me years to understand the difference between past simple and present perfect. What do you really do with it? What's the difference in meaning? How do you understand the intentions of the speaker if you don't have that background grammar knowledge? So I would say, going back to the question, you probably will wish that you haven't started me on EAL, because I can talk for the whole, I think I could carry on for the whole night. But I would say you are the best resource and you have to invest in yourself, and there is lots and lots of opportunities. There is a brilliant linguist called Jeremy Harmer, and he's got a series of books that you can download as PDFs, and he's got his website. He's incredible, probably more famous abroad, and he does a lot of work with international schools all over the world. And his practical English in Practice, I think it's called, is a book full of not only theory and a little bit of linguistics, but very practical solutions. What do you do as a teacher in your classroom, and not be constrained to worksheets that take ages? Then you spend ages handing them out, and then you spend ages trying to explain them to the students. And what you are, in essence, do, you are singling out your EAL learners. So it's not only widening the language gap, you are constantly isolating them from the rest of the group, because they know that they are different. And they know that you are openly saying to them, you can't complete that work. Whereas if you, as a resource, prepare yourself to find strategies that you will be using time and time and time again, you don't feel as overwhelmed, because you know, and you've got that confidence that you can do it, whatever ability, or whatever not ability, whatever language level you get in your group, you'll be able to just decide on the spot what to do and how to scaffold and how to differentiate for those students, because sometimes differentiation needs to happen. It's not only scaffolding that is needed. And for this strategy, you need to have the full understanding of what your students are like, what they can, what they can't do, because sometimes within one group you will have students at exactly the same early stages of acquisition, but they will have different strengths, and then you will have to play to those strengths to cover and to fill in the gaps that that might be there.
Oh,
Wow. That is the most interesting response to anything regarding EAL that I've ever heard. And I've been teaching for years. And a lot of what you said about, it takes a lot of time. You need to, it's so right. I had to learn it the hard way. So fantastic. I wish we could allow you to continue, but we need to ask the question before drawing to close. But Kasia, thank you so much.
Yeah.
So Jenny, we end by posing quite a challenging question actually to you. Why does equality, diversity and inclusion matter in the classroom? Why would it matter in my classroom?
I'm really glad this is the question we're ending on, because I think that this is something that we often aren't brave enough to talk about when we do teacher training. And I really wish we were brave enough to have this conversation more openly, because that would solve a lot of the problems we have. Without wanting to make people feel uncomfortable, some people have to feel uncomfortable. And I think that a lot of this work is about us embracing feeling uncomfortable. We have to acknowledge that we are a majority white middle class profession, and our society is an incredibly diverse one. And our schools are not built on structures and understandings which treat all groups with in an equal way. Okay, so I'm talking about schools not being particularly not being as well geared towards the needs of women as they are to the needs of men, and not being as well geared in terms of kind of curriculum design, times of the school year, kind of dates, and kind of even times of the school week. We forget that most of our Muslim students want to go to mosque on a Friday afternoon, but we finish at the same time on a Friday in most schools, like every week. There are lots and lots of things in terms of the structures of our schools and how all of those things work, which are based on essentially a Victorian system that was in place when only men and unmarried women were teachers. And we have not changed that, in 150 years, and that needs to be something that we interrogate in a really meaningful way. In many ways, our curriculum hasn't changed either, and I think we're having lots of conversations about curriculum at the moment, and it has all been very highly politicized. It doesn't need to be political. It's not political to say that the curriculum is not representative of the society we live in. It's not political to say that this curriculum is not representative of the truth of world history in many ways. And I know that that is something a lot of people disagree with, but it's a fact. I think it's really important that new teachers recognize that, and recognize that it's okay to feel uncomfortable. It's okay to feel that you don't know enough. It's okay to feel that you're never going to know everything about the experience of the students that you teach. You're never going to know everything about something so complicated. And this is something that we're always going to have to be working on. This is a constant piece of work. This is us working on ourselves, understanding our biases, understanding our preconceptions. I work in an incredibly diverse school where the majority of students are non-white, and it's a really, really incredible place. But even at our school, we've had issues with new cohorts of students coming in from different cultures. You know, we had a massive influx of students from a particular part of the world. We have lots of asylum seekers and refugees and things. And our staff really needed some training and support around how they spoke about that group of students, because their impressions of new students and their cultural understandings and the kinds of things that those students were bringing to the building were not what we would want from our teaching staff. So it's a constant piece of work. Just because you're thinking, right, well, I'm a liberal person, I'm well educated, I don't treat people badly, I try and treat everyone the same, that's not what we're talking about here. Nobody's accusing you of doing anything other than that. This is about recognizing within ourselves that we have to do a constant piece of work to be aware of our biases and to make sure the kind of the work we do in the classroom is always acknowledging the fact that we can never fully understand the life experience of somebody else. The lived experience of our students who have darker skin is going to be something that we will never, ever, ever understand. And we have to accept that and feel uncomfortable with that, and that's fine. My mum has darker skin than me. I'm mixed race Caribbean, but my mum is black, and you can tell she's black. My mum's experience of the world has been very, very different to my own experience of the world, and I have to be okay with that, and I'm uncomfortable with that, but I'm okay with that. What I would say to new teachers is you need to take your ego out of it. It's not about you. It's not about kind of what you perceive you're being kind of accused of. If a student says to you, you're saying that to me because I'm black, sometimes students will say that. Sometimes they'll say it and it's justified. Sometimes they'll say it and it's not justified. Teenagers say mad things sometimes. Teenagers say true things sometimes, and you need to appreciate that. So this is not about you. It's not about your ego. It's about you having an opportunity to listen to these young people who are probably having a harder time of it than you are. Really, really important that you embrace the opportunity to educate yourself. I would highly recommend a couple of books to you. There are loads and loads and loads of books on kind of anti-racism and understanding kind of your position as perhaps a more, a position of advantage. So even if you're a person of color who teaches, you are still an advantage. You're a person who has advantage over others because you are in a position where you're a teacher. You've got a stable job. You've got a stable income. You are educated. You are aware of the world. You are in a position of power to some extent over some other people. And we all need to educate ourselves. So I'd highly recommend that you read How to Be an Anti-Racist by Ibram Kendi. He's excellent. Sorry, not Ibram X Kendi. I'm losing my mind. I've written it down and everything. But also a really nice one that's perhaps just another way in as an educator. I would really, really recommend reading My Name is Why by Lem Sisse. Just because it's a book which is beautifully written, but also it's from a British perspective, and it also talks about kind of issues in the care system, and it's all a very kind of personal, powerful narrative. So I think it is a huge question, and I really think we could just do a whole show on this. Again, it's like the EAL thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
But what I would implore new teachers to do is not just think about pedagogy. I love pedagogy. I eat, sleep and breathe pedagogy. It's all I'm really interested in. But we cannot do that great work in terms of education and kind of planning our lessons and doing all the teacher stuff without understanding that we exist in, and in many ways perpetuate, systems of power, which mean that some of our students are going to struggle and not feel valued and not feel as though they have a place in our classroom. And I'll give you a really, really, really quick example, because I know it's kind of the end of the show. But I had a student last year in year 10 who is Nigerian, and we had it was Remembrance Day, and I expected all the students to stand up and do their 2-minute silence, and he stayed sat down in his chair, and I didn't question it until afterwards, and I probably challenged him too harshly, because I get a bit sometimes, and I sometimes have to think about how I react to students. We had a conversation about it in the classroom, and I was cross with him because I thought he'd been disrespectful, and I thought he was being difficult on purpose. And then at the end of the lesson, we had a conversation, and he basically just said, why should I stand up to respect the British Army when blah, 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 all of these things about Nigerian history and his heritage and his pride in his country and the things that have happened and the, you know, all of the kind of political and challenging situations that have happened in Nigeria in the last kind of 20-30 years, which I'm fully aware of because I'm really interested in that country, and kind of didn't think about it. And this is a student who's thinking, I'm empowered, I have knowledge, this is how I feel, and I'm not going to be forced to do X, Y, or Z. Now, that conversation informed a lot of other work around how he's been feeling in history and in RE and in languages and in lots of other situations where he's felt that he has been kind of essentially oppressed, and he's been tracing it through his entire school experience for the last couple of months. And this was the thing that made a normally polite, quiet, hard-working boy who would never say boo to a goose suddenly go, no. And you know what? It changed my perception of how I think I'm so educated and I'm such an anti-racist. Clearly I still have work to do, and I just think we need to be open.
Thanks, Jenny.
Thank you. An impressive response to a very challenging, it's a difficult question. And I think I love the point you reiterated in various ways about it's not about us. It's actually looking at things from other perspectives, which can be difficult. I think it's hard to, sometimes understand or even have empathy if you've not actually had that particular lived experience. So yeah, something that we need to have a lot of work on. So thank you so much. We've gone over time actually, but thank you to our audiences. If you're still with us, thank you so much. And also thank you to Mark as well, because we've seen some of the comments you've been posting as well. Mark was engaged in a number of different events today, including the Future of EdTech event with brilliant session this morning. So that's the reason why he's not with us today, but he'll be joining us next week. So thank you to everyone. Thank you to our guests, Jenny, Hannah and Kasia. Thank you to Zena. Thanks for welcoming me back again. And take care, everyone. Look after yourselves and see you next week. Bye-bye.
Bye.
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 Bye.